They claimed that I squandered the potential. I tossed away all I owned. Regret that they were unable to. Not aloud, of course, but explain to others. My family was too well off for that. But I still heard it in the softening of their gaze, and the silences, profound sympathy at each event over the long stops after hearing the question, "So what is Jessica doing now?" I gradually quit correcting them and allowed talking to them made them believe I was lost. Since the truth doesn't always shout, but occasionally it waits. My name is Jessica Parker, a 34-year-old resident at a small flat on the outskirts of Portland. I fix my own coffee. Sure, I still drive that, but the tap leaks. Noises in an ancient Toyota Corolla when it turns to the left. To them, I am the one who remained. The individual who chose not to marry didn't climb the corporate ladder without purchasing a home with a large backyard. I turned into the family story, a caution, a rumor of things not to, since it wasn't always this way. I once the national honor for overachievers. Scholarship to the top of my class in society, Stanford, the family's future attorney. That title persisted till I left. In the middle of my second year of law school, shortly after my engagement ended, separated, and my anxiousness ceased to react. To take medicine or sleep, they didn't realize that they simply adjusted without asking their voice when they uttered my name. My Emily, the sister, however, came next. The strategy she researched for promoting marriage young rose through the ranks of a company where she was able to hold coffee and wear heels. Emily could boast with ease and confidence. Regarding 3 weeks prior to her wedding, I received a group SMS. "Could you please assist with the programs or something minor that I am aware of? You aren't actually working at the moment, The message, "I own my own," made me blink. Business. It's not ostentatious. Anything you could comprehend in just one sentence, yet it's sufficiently real to pay my rent so that I can hire 3 part-time, as well as to be highlighted in a national social innovation podcast. They didn't understand, since they never requested, but I agreed to assist with the applications. Since that's what do we grin and say it's okay, quiet ones? We moved the chairs. But occasionally in silence, we construct something larger than those who disregarded us the evening before. I attended the rehearsal dinner for the wedding. It's fun to fold napkins into swans. It was important that my mother introduced me to Emily will soon become Jessica's in-laws. She works as a freelance creative. The catchphrase, freelance, is what they usage when they're unwilling to acknowledge that I'm not sure, but I simply grinned and said something similar. Emily didn't glance up because she was too occupied with her bridal party's laughter, although Nathan, her fiancé, observed her for a brief spark of interest, or perhaps anything else, and it vanished without my knowledge. Considering it, the wedding day arrived. Cathedral Vale rows of quick white flowers of happy individuals who were all aware of their simple table 5 was my role model. I once heard Aunt Denise say that she prayed. I would discover guidance without correcting her. Either since if you inform others that you're content when you don't resemble them version of achievement that they believe your dinner was served and toasts were prepared. I remained silent and smiled sweetly at the appropriate times till Nathan, the bridegroom, approached and leaned in a drink of holding a glass of champagne and uttering gently, "Wait, do you look like Jessica Parker?" My fork froze as he gazed at the Teachwell's founder, the digital platform for schools that are underprivileged. My voice was not sarcastic, rather it was Aruck. Family members ceased discussing their forks, hovered in mid-air during the ensuing quiet, didn't feel the need to pass judgment this time. Seemed to be a gap in the story that I looked at Nathan and said yes. There was a long pause at table 5, precisely 6 seconds, which may not sound like a lot, but 6 seconds at wedding time is a lifetime sufficient for forks to drop, jaws to shut, and brows to raise. My mother appeared in the middle of a sentence. Red wine had just been spilt on Nathan's gaze remained fixed on the dress code. "Teach well," he said, almost. "I read about it in Fast. he told himself. The company provides a platform that aids rural schools have instant access to curricular revisions, correct? I felt 100 eyes on me as I nodded, trying so hard not to see me at last. Indeed, that's Denise, my aunt, blinked at you. You created I wanted to say no, but I grew the company. Silently, as you discussed Emily's anxiety and her Pinterest board regarding my locating a spouse, but I simply grinned, and Nathan said, yes, for the last 5 years. Looked startled. That's amazing that you were on last year's education tech panel. I watched your narrative, didn't I? Regarding the Utah school without Wi-Fi, the table didn't know, and that almost made me cry. What should I do with it, Mom? She laughed brittly after she had recovered. Well, we always knew Jessica, he continued, was creative. Once more, that term family code for unstable and abnormal not among, but it didn't hurt us that night. Nathan took out a chair and sat down next to it. To me, and started asking me how did I construct the back end? Obtain the grants from the people who created the accessibility dashboard. I've not done this in years. About my work at a family gathering. Not as a joke, not in whispers, but more like it was significant since it happened. And as I spoke, I noticed my sister observing from Emily. She wasn't grinning across the room. Had always been the celebrity, and she received the thank the parties for giving me the attention. The anticipation until I left, from law school, and gained attention. They didn't like that because they were down with me. I failed, but I made a big deal out of it. Publicly before going missing, they was unaware of what I had incorporated into the Silent Teachwell began as a Google document. I tutored students in underfunded high schools, part-time, and discovered that each instructor the person we worked with stated the same thing. Too disjointed, we lack what the larger schools, therefore I created a tool for it that permitted districts to exchange and upload and work together to update lesson plans. Reducing waiting times and filling in resource shortages took night classes to learn how to code once more. For my first server, I sold my furnishings. I survived in space on quick noodles and give rejections, but I persisted since, whenever a teacher in a rural area claimed that this altered the way I taught it light, something about me that my family doesn't like. How could working for a non-profit for 3 years take notice, followed by a grant, then an additional feature to a podcast? Teachwell currently has more than 40,000 users. There was nobody at that wedding, largely in schools. Never heard of, but educational institutions that didn't inquire about any of the thing. And perhaps that's what hurt. Not that they didn't understand me, but that they never made an effort to comprehend while Emily was dancing after supper. My mother with her new husband. When she got close, her smile was tight. Once more, the armor-like one she wore. You never mentioned this teaching location to us. I fixed what she said about teaching well. She tilted her head gently, asking why she hadn't. You mentioned it earlier, and I shrugged. Appear to have been heard by anyone. She blinked. It might have stung, but it might not have, was difficult to determine whether you may have. She contributed something, and I did, I said, simply not in the words you were hoping to hear. She simply glanced at that without responding, as though she had already begun rewriting the moment in her thoughts, transforming it into not something that made her uncomfortable. I slipped later that evening, left the reception area, and went for a solitary stroll. Via the garden path behind the location, the silence was the kind you have to earn. When an excessive number of rooms filled with, I stood beneath the fairy lights and heard a noise. Recalling my most recent experience sitting in this, a lot, the day I left, there was silence. Law school. The day I became the one that no one called. The family's collapse. I gave a quiet smile I allowed them to remain silent. Since I had finished reducing to fit, this was simply their definition of success. Starting on the Monday following, the My Inbox appeared different at the wedding. Was the typical school district stack. Requests and an excessive number of urgent, Logins not functioning topic lines, but then I noticed anything new halfway down. Keynote panel on Rural Subject Inquiry Executive Education Solutions. West Coast Learning Summit's director slowly opened it, almost fearing that it would vanish. Hello, Jessica. It started your efforts via Forbes Education feature and just received a call from a contact who praised you at a wedding. Nathan, they must have intended me to take part in a panel in San Francisco next month. A senator, Francisco, and 3 other founders is the principal of a significant charter school network, was quite professional. The kind of chance you send to your pleased parents who said, "I thought you'd want to view this, but I chose not to forward it." Looked at it for a while before closing the laptop since it still contains a piece of me. Pondered whether they would care. I visited the corner cafe that afternoon. I was always employed there while the walls of I stirred, because my flat felt too small. I saw 2 new friends while drinking my coffee. Requests on LinkedIn from both visitors, and one had written at the wedding, "I had no notion that was your... I think the job you've done is amazing. Love to connect." The term connect seemed odd. I had been invisible for years. Background noise at gatherings with family relegated to brief conversation and courteous nods. All of a sudden, there was attention, admiration, or even interest, but not from the folks I once desired it from. My Emily's message chimed on the phone. "This week, are you free to join me for lunch?" My sister and I hadn't read it twice. A genuine discussion in more than a year. We'd said hello to each other during the holidays. Wanted pictures of the family, but we hadn't really spoke with her before to her engagement. Responded, "The garden on Wednesday at noon, cafe on 5th. Emily looks gorgeous. Forward to it, the final heart was made. Emily didn't do hearts, at least, which made me hesitate. When Wednesday arrived, she was not for me. Already seated at the table when I got there. She had frosted sunglasses on her head. Latte was flawlessly composed despite being half drunk. Felt strange, but she smiled when she saw me. As if she were practicing the word hey, she sprang up to give me a hug and added, "You look fantastic." "Thanks." I sat down and said, "So do you." We made a brief conversation concerning the climate and wedding presents until I didn't know. She eventually leaned in. "Regarding your business," she remarked. I nodded as if I truly didn't know. She paused. "So why didn't you? Tell us something." "You could have said." I looked at her first. "Would it have made a difference, Emily?" Blinked, was taken by surprise, of course. "Would I have arched my brow earlier? You asked me over Christmas if I was still doing that internet thing the previous year. Perhaps next year you'll have anything genuine to provide." And each time I mentioned anything regarding my job, the topic shifted, and she looked down, stirring. She said of her drink, "I guess I didn't realize." I murmured softly, "That's the point." No one did, as nobody was interested in ask. For once, there was a pause before she didn't prepare a defense, before she, sighing. "I believe I've always resented you. It was a little unexpected." "What do you think?" "She stated you walked away, so you left. From the law school plan, from all of their desires, and even when you did your own thing despite their criticism." I never had that thing. Bravery with which I sat, as it was the first sincere statement she had made to me in years. I informed her that I didn't feel brave. Even though I was crumbling, I had to make a decision, something that would not shatter. She nodded at me. "Gradually, you selected something significant. I apologize for the way, and I see that now. We treated you the same way I did, unsure of what to say. I had a dream about particular instance, but it felt distinct and softer, less triumphal, more real life. I'm glad I said that, human. Actually, we sat for a long in silence, but it was the kind, not the frigid type. That fixed something. Before we went, she was invisible. Crossed the table and made contact with my hand. "Jess, you're not and never were a failure. We simply weren't making payments. Focus that stuck with me, but to be honest, I didn't require their approval. No more, since I was constructing something that was important, whether or not Cheers and the world would soon find out. The week following lunch with Emily felt oddly. There were still no significant conversations in the family group, no calls from my mother asking pointed questions, but overcompensation or abrupt praise. But something had changed. Not loud or obvious, but I had the impression that a change in air pressure, such as the eye, began to halt between thunder and rain. Being tagged in unexpected posts from a wedding guest who was really honored to lastly meet Teach Well's founder, the "World needs more folks like you this weekend," another from an Oklahoma educator. Due to Teach Well, I had never met was able to modify my course material for pupils who have learning disabilities. Many thanks, Jessica. Then Parker received a telegram from a "We are writing a feature on a local reporter, Pacific Northwest Changemakers. You've received multiple nominations. Are you amenable to a brief?" I gazed at the screen during the interview. Nevertheless, I had battled for years to obtain people that cared, submitted chilly funding applications, sent a late-night email to the superintendent the evening only for someone to notice. And I was starting to notice. I still haven't told my family yet. Let them listen to it independently. Moment when I wasn't attempting to demonstrate something else than just the arrival of the truth. I had coffee on Friday without being invited. Nadia, my former tutor, was the first individual who ever glanced at Teach Well and uttered the words, "This might be national." She glanced at, I grinned and said, "Something's different." "You're standing taller," she said, chuckled. "Perhaps I'm just finished." She took a drink of her espresso while ducking and, "Are you prepared for what's ahead?" Leaned forward. "What do you mean by coming?" "I mean, attention. Jess Grant speaking engagements to the strain of being recognized that you've been working so long in the shadows that, are you prepared to be seen, I wonder?" When I gave that some attention, I realized for the first time ever, I wasn't. I was sick of being seen and terrified of pretending it didn't matter. I replied, "Yeah, I'm ready." 3 days later, the interview was released. Afterwards, a straightforward article about the development of Teach Well, using a picture of myself in front of a classroom grinning alongside one of the first student pilot groups, were Jessica. "Parker the Quiet" was the caption. "Visionary transforming the public's future schooling." I didn't forward it to my mother, but someone took action since the following. She called to say hello in the morning, and after an extended pause, "Hello," I said, having read she described the article as impressive. "Thank you again. You seemed content." I was unaware that she had taken a breath. "I am aware of the scope of your actions. I feel like I've missed you a lot." Again, "I'm sorry, Jessica," she said, murmured softly. "I realize it's late, but although it wasn't flawless, it was something." "Thank you," I replied. We spent a couple more minutes discussing nothing major, like groceries or a new bakery that opened beneath it, next to her. Everything was novel, delicate, and respectful. Later that week, the tentative but genuine. This time, the interview was shared by my inbox on a national education platform. Overwhelming speaking invites from schools, inquiries about partnerships, and even a few cautious communications from family, members that live far away. They abruptly realized they were connected with me. And then at the conclusion of I received the invitation this week, Emily and Nathan's brunch party after the wedding, a casual gathering for close family and friends to commemorate their new adventure with you, that I wasn't going to go, but I was interested about how they'd watch me now to see what they would say and do. I was curious if anything had altered a lot, so I accepted the brunch. Was behind a country house in a bright garden. Club white tablecloths, tiny name for mimosas. Cards. I donned a dress that was silky navy, and my armor-like assurance as I stepped inside, some heads turned and grinned courteously. Others appeared unsure, as if they had just acknowledged that they might have been mistaken. Nathan has been noticing me for years. Initially, and Jessica smiled. "I'm glad you made it, Emily." Came over and gave me a strong embrace this time. Sincerely, we shared a table with our eye anticipated the typical awkwardness from cousins. Conversation, but I heard Jessica's, "This morning, the company was featured on the news. Collaborates with educational systems across the country." I did read that article, and she did build it. From the beginning, such as by themselves, they ceased to be whispers, were expressions of reverence, especially for the initial "I didn't feel like an outsider at the time" table. I thought it should have been at the wedding, not the ceremony, not the reception, not the speeches that don't even take place during cake chopping, but during dinner, immediately following before the main course. The salads were cleared. The course arrived. I had quietly chosen a seat in the back corner. Sitting at a cousin's table, who once told me technology was a man's domain, but it didn't matter, even though I wasn't there for them. Therefore, Emily, even though I wanted to honor her day, and in addition, I had made amends with remaining undetectable in spaces like this, or at least what I believed to be the clinking of cutlery and the gentle buzz of I was halfway along the buzzing hallway. Through a courteous discussion with the florist on hydrangeas at the time, Nathan from the other side stood Emily's new husband. The space and approached our table, grinned, bent over me, and inquired, whispering, "Are you Jessica Parker?" "I believe you are." The room continued to move, instantly, but the surrounding air did look up and grinned. "What do you mean?" "Broader, I recently came upon an interview on LinkedIn, morning regarding the digital Teachwell platform for education that is changing rural educational settings. The Jessica Parker was the founder's name." I froze before I could, exactly like you. Someone at the table murmured in response. "That's what Jessica has been doing some work on the internet." Nathan appeared astonished. Jessica Parker is the creator of software for an adaptive curriculum for inadequately funded schools. I nodded slightly, which is, I felt as though someone had hit the pause button on the entire evening's discussions regarding forks hovered as our motionless heads twisted. Even the servers decreased their speed in midair. Emily stepped across the room and glanced, squinting as they attempt to read the moment Nathan replied, as he turned to face the table. "Dude, do you comprehend? She's the cause of my, at last, a cousin's Wyoming school received a planning there. Digital learning activities. The dropout rate decreased by 30% in a single. I read the case study last year, Uncle. Raymond once made a joke about me getting married." Rich sat after clearing his throat. Aunt Denise's wine glass was straighter. Nathan glanced as she swayed and put it down. "My eyes are wide. I helped you build this from the ground up." I finally said in a calm voice. "But yes, I began it on my own in my flat 5 years ago." He shook his head earlier. "Wow, you're incredible." I could feel the fire. Of people looking at me, it used to make me shrink, which caused me to stand up a bit. Taller Emily's face eventually came into view. Unreadable. "Jess," she said, gently, "you never fully disclosed the extent to me." I answered, "I tried, but nobody ever." After listening for a while, Before I could respond, I winced and apologized. Nathan held up his glass to Jessica. "Parker, a woman whose job is done in silence, transforming lives nationwide, may we never undervalue the importance of grace and grit, can construct the room behind closed doors, clapping in an awkward and impolite manner. Actually, and for the first time in my life, I didn't think my life was the backup plan. I thought the headline once the cheers subsided and, when the meal resumed, my mother approached. At first, she merely looked without saying anything. Eyes that were gentle in a manner I hadn't noticed since I was a young child. She said, "Last night I saw your panel. I grieved and blinked you from San Francisco." Observed it, and she gave me 3 nods. I swallowed hard because I was so preoccupied with what you didn't turn into, what she claimed I never observed, what you were. She leaned out and touched him gently. I'm proud of you. My hand. My throat constricted, Jessica. But I didn't. I just nodded, crying. When the music grew later that evening and the dance floor was crowded with people, when I stepped out onto the patio, the atmosphere was Nathan. The sky is cold and dotted with stars. Joined me after a short while, too. He handed me his spectacles. First, what will happen to Teachwell I? Grinned growth in further rural areas, other languages, and possibly worldwide. There is a team in South Africa that can help. He lifted his glass and asked for a pilot. To the silent beginnings of the future, we also clinked drinks as the evening wore on. As time passed, I reflected on the years I hid and turned down my own light to don't make other people. I felt uneasy as I considered how they spoke behind my back and referred to me as a failure, changed the course of my life before it was completed. But they didn't write the truth I told my narrative, and the world was now reading it at last.